position representing 2.4 million people in King County, Washington. After graduating from Franklin High School in South Seattle, Gurmai received degrees from Stanford University and UPenn Law School and worked in the Obama White House. His experiences growing up in public housing and going to public schools inspired him to pursue anti-poverty work through the Congressional Hunger Center, and also to found Rising Leaders, Inc., a nonprofit that equips underserved middle school students with mentors and life skills training. Since taking office, Gurmai has offered bold solutions to problems that need immediate regional leadership. He has worked to build and maintain affordable housing for communities experiencing displacement, invested more in youth opportunities, expanded public transit in neighborhoods that have the highest need, reformed criminal legal systems, and made the political process more inclusive across communities and generations. So thank you, Gurmai, for being with us. All right, and next we have Mazzagide. And Mazza is a dynamic human rights advocate and international relations expert who collaborates with global institutions and intergovernmental organizations such as the European Union, United Nations, and the Human Rights Watch, as well as grassroots organizations to fight state-sanctioned violence against civilians and advocate for women globally. She's a prolific community organizer who has raised millions online and offline for disaster relief and humanitarian aid provision to crisis-stricken communities. She presents regularly on leading media and at conferences as keynote and panelist to advocate for human rights and equity. Mazza is an international relations researcher, human rights advocate, and a community organizer at Omna Tigrai, a nonpartisan global organization that advocates for Tigrayans and other marginalized people. She's also the co-founder of the first independent women's rights movement in Tigray, Ethiopia. Before the start of the ongoing war, Mazza, alongside her colleagues at the independent women's rights movement in Tigray, was successful in providing humanitarian and economic assistance to vulnerable women who were highly impacted by the COVID pandemic. Mazza completed her undergrad degree in South Korea, where she earned a BA in International Studies on a merit-based scholarship and graduated with honors. She received her MA in International Relations in the US and graduated with distinction. Thank you, Mazza, for being here. And lastly, we have Fana Melez. So Fana is a current congressional intern and student at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University, where she's pursuing a BS in public policy. Through a series of interactions with the state of Georgia's mental health system as a patient advocate, Fana bore witness to existing disparities in treatment and access to care across marginalized groups. This inspired a desire to pursue a career in public office to support the drafting of health policies and legislation that promote equitable access to quality health care. In the most recent legislative session in Georgia, Fana served as a legislative intern for State Senator Kim Jackson and was able to aid in drafting SR 800, a Senate resolution calling for unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, in addition to organizing a press conference at the state legislature. And also, let me add, Fana put in a lot of work for that, just on her own, nonstop, working late nights for that bill, so, for the resolution. Yes, thank you, Fana. And as she continues on her journey, Fana plans to utilize her growing legislative background to continue advocating for the people of Tigray and promoting civic education and engagement within Tigrayan communities across the diaspora. Okay, so we have some amazing panelists with us, as you see. So I'll go ahead and start with our first question, and each of you guys can answer it. So we have a little bit about your background. Considering that each of you are engaged politically, what inspired the initial steps of your journey to becoming civically engaged citizens?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to speak members of our community because personally I believe change only comes from within and when you start from the grassroots. So any opportunity to talk with members of our community, to learn from each other's experience is a great pleasure for me. So I want to say thank you so much for inviting me here today. In order to make sure everyone understands what I'm trying to say, I would speak both in Tigrinya and English, and I hope that's okay for everyone. To answer the first question, I think ever since I was young, primarily due to the influence my mom had on me growing up, I always knew that I have a role to play in making this world a better place for all of us. But I also recognize the fact that it's tremendously impossible to drive change if you don't start at home and small. So ever since I was on my early years of teenager, I was very active and involved in community services in my neighborhood and my school. And most of it comes from the fact that I came from a very humble beginning, but I had a mom that instilled in me this idea of being able to drive change no matter what your background is. So knowing that fact, I have always been active in politics and rights advocacy. Prior to the conflict being waged against our people, I was actively working on empowering women in Tigray politically and economically. Because if we want to see a prosperous Tigray, for that matter, a prosperous world, we have to educate our women, because they are half of the total population globally. So you can just بحدا يتكم التقاس كم زي يكال نحدا ناي محورسة كأكل ترحيز كم خدونا يكال. And so زي فلسلازن أبركو, I was actively working on ensuring that the Tigrayan women have political and economic liberty. So to that effect, my friends and I in Tigray, we co-founded the very first independent feminist group in Tigray called Yukhono. Through Yukhono, we were trying to create an environment that treats men and women equally so that they can utilize their potential to the best of their ability and eventually be able to create a better Tigray. But while I was doing that, I was also actively engaging in humanitarian efforts to respond to the crisis Tigray was going under, be it the COVID pandemic or the locust swarm. So I have always been active, but I think everything I do comes from the notion, knowing that I have a role to play to make this world a better place, and also to see the kind of world I want to see. كل شعب لو تخمت عند حرم دلخوينا أو قلنا خوينا كنا نمتو نوعتنا قدر كنجات إننا يلس لزامن ولا قليل تزخونا بعقمنا خن جورز جبنا سرحنا مجوار بأمنتنا ممراحي لجميرة مالتي. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazza.
Well, I want to first start by saying thank you to all of the organizers of the Wa'ala conference. And just like Ma'aza said, these opportunities to come together and learn from each other are extremely powerful and such a blessing. And thank you, Samha, for the introductions. As far as what inspired my initial steps, I would definitely say it also begins at home. I was fortunate to grow up in a family where my voice was valued as a woman and where my parents cared about what I had to say. And that very much translated into the classroom, where I was a confident speaker and I recognized that everyone has something to offer. So in high school, I remember co-founding the first women's political club at my high school. We did a lot of work to break the stigma around menstruation, and also did a lot of advocacy with regards to criminal justice. But I would say the first time that I ever considered going into public office happened in college. So a loved one of mine was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and navigating the state of Georgia's mental health system was extremely difficult, and it was extremely overwhelming. And if you know anything about an illness of psychosis, it's very serious, and individuals who live with serious mental illnesses are extremely vulnerable, and many of them don't have advocates. And even when they have loved ones who want to advocate on their behalf, it can be extremely difficult to know how to start, where to go for help. And so in my time navigating the mental health system, I began to see how much legislation and policies impact an individual's ability to receive access to care. and not just any kind of care, quality care, sustainable care, community-based care. And that's when I realized that I didn't want any other families to suffer, especially families who come from marginalized backgrounds, who are less likely to know English as a first language, and to have networks, and to have access to health insurance. And so I would say for myself, it was definitely a very trauma-informed decision, but one that translated into a very beautiful thing, because it allowed me to see how we all truly are interconnected, and our suffering can lead to so much building with others.
I want to thank all the organizers of the event too. Can people raise your hand if you helped organize this event? Let's give them some love, everybody. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yes, give them a round of applause. Everybody who put the event together, everybody who made the food, everybody who's been moving chairs. We appreciate you all. Thank you for bringing us all together. It really does make a big difference. Thank you. What inspired me to get into politics? Honestly, similar answer to Maaza, my mom. You know, seeing how she was displaced within Ethiopia for a long time, and then displaced out of Ethiopia into Sudan as a refugee. And then when we came to the US, it's supposed to be the land of opportunity, a place where if you work hard enough, you can advance and you can take care of your kids and you can pass on wealth to your kids. But we all know that's not how it happens for most of our communities. My mom got one job. One job wasn't enough to pay for rent and food and taking care of your kids. Then she got a second job. Then she got a third job. And that still wasn't enough. And it would be one thing if you worked jobs like this. She's a nursing assistant. It would be one thing if you did this kind of work and over time you climb up the economic ladder, and then over time you can retire in dignity. But that's not what happened. My mom worked so much that she ended up blowing out both of her knees, and now she's disabled and she can't work. I know you weren't supposed to clap for that, but you helped me out. So the other part of it is that story that I just told is not just the story of my family. For my friends here who are from Seattle, we know that that's the story of thousands of people around Seattle, where people with low-wage jobs are working harder and harder, and every year they're getting less and less out of it because the cost of living is going up so much. So for me, politics is a way of creating a better system so that people like my mom, people that I meet all the time around Seattle and King County, can thrive. You know, one job should be enough. If you work one job, you can afford the rent in your house, and you can provide a safe place for your kids to live and go to school. So that's the vision, and that's why I got involved.
Great. Thank you, guys. It really shows how our personal lives can definitely develop a lot of our professional experiences. So going off of that, so considering that governments have an obligation globally to serve and protect citizens and meet basic needs, what do you all feel is the obligation of citizens?
I do think it's not great that people tell me I'm the only Tigrawi who's elected in the United States. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that's not good. We probably need more. But I would say everybody doesn't have to run for office, but everybody should get involved in politics and influence policy. And I say that because running for office is not the only way to shape policy. You can think to yourself, what is my gift? What is the gift that I can give to the world? And you can use that gift to shape policy. I have some friends in here who influence policy through photography and art, like Binyam. I have friends like Lul who start businesses and generate capital for our communities, and that influences policy. We have people like Mazza and Fana who organize community, and that influences policy. And so it doesn't matter what your gift is, just use your gift to benefit your community. And I think that's the obligation that we all have to each other.
Fana?
I can go. So, you know, I think in the United States, we have a pretty low standard of what it means to be a civically engaged citizen. A lot of us will vote in the presidential elections. We get that sticker, we post it on Facebook, and we feel like we did our job. But the reality is, that's a pretty low bar. It's not enough to simply vote and then never engage ever again. It's so important that we understand who we're voting for and why, that we know the causes that we're standing for, that we know the individuals and groups that we're defending. We know the vulnerable groups, right? That we know the policies being implemented. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that voting is a right, yes, but it was a right that was fought for. And I think specifically in this country, I think it gets very complicated with identity politics. Yes, we are Tagaru, but we're also Black people in the United States. And we didn't just waltz in here and get to vote. People fought for that. They were bloodied for that. And I think when we understand what was sacrificed, right? And when we understand why so much was put on the line for our right to vote, then we understand the power in it. And I think it's really understanding the basis of democracy, right? It's understanding that the power truly is in the hands of the people only if they're aware of the power that they hold. And so it's not enough for you to vote. You have to engage with your elected officials, know who they are, speak with them, reach out to them. One of the beautiful things that came out of the press conference in Atlanta was that it inspired a lot of the adults in our community to get to know their state officials, their local officials. I remember being at the community center a week after, and a lot of moms were coming up to me and they were saying, I didn't even know there was a difference between a congressional senator and a state senator. One mom told me, I can't wait to buy Senator Jackson Azuria, invite her to our community. People were excited to vote locally, and that made me realize, aha, they're getting it now. They realize that the power is in their hands when they come together. And so I would say that as citizens, we have an obligation to understand the power of our votes and to understand the power of our voices collectively as well.
Yes, I definitely agree. And also these conferences that we have and TPN and everything are a great start for us to learn how to get involved in our local governments and things like that. I think one of the good things with TPN is we always make sure that things are accessible. So having, I think we did like a translation in Tigrinya on the voting process before we had elections. So just making sure we're making the effort to making sure these resources are accessible so then we can make the change within our communities. So thanks for highlighting that. Our next question is, when it comes to civic engagement, what do you feel is the role of students? And how do you encourage those in high school and college to utilize their privilege, and why is it important? What kind of advice do you have for the younger generation?
I'll start. I think this is a very important question because talking about this would help us understand the level of involvement students have had previously in Ethiopia and the state building process, especially during the student movement era, and at the same time, the kind of involvement students across the world have today in amplifying the plight of the Tigrayan people. It also would give us an opportunity to talk about things we should continue to do. From a personal experience, this war began when I was doing my master's degree. I was in the middle of school. I didn't have the time, I didn't have the mental stability to focus on my education. It was easier to give up than to continue. But I was always reminded by the fact that I am able to do the little things that I'm doing today because someone has invested in my education previously. If I wasn't educated enough, if I didn't know the little things I know, I wouldn't have been able to help my people in any way and also save myself in the process. My biggest advice is for students that are in college and high school, you have to use your platforms, you have to use the privilege that are accessible to you to amplify the plight of our people, but it shouldn't be at the expense of your studies. It shouldn't be at the expense of your future. Because, even from a self-actualizing interest, if you don't go to school today, if you don't focus on your education, while dedicating your whole time for Tigray, while dedicating for advocacy, tomorrow you wouldn't be the same person that you were today. Or at least you wouldn't have harnessed new knowledge, new information that would enable you to help Tigray sustainably. So your work is not going to be sustainable if you don't continue to develop other person. So it's very, very important that we focus on education and empowering ourselves in a way that would help us to position ourselves better than we're today. because لما عند كل ساعتنا نتقرأ أو فينا أو تمرت زلوا قلعت تمرتهم دحر فوكس دي غيرهم ناقاد دحر ناقا حدش فلتته اليومن financial independence هنا اليومن سلازم نتقرأ تقعتين يا يوم كونو نتمحور سوي زلنا وتقعتين يا يوم كونو بقد سألنا نتقرأ كن حجزان دحر دلينا مجمرتان وعلتنا كن حجز لنا مجمرتان وعلنا عود زخانه هو تكون مرحل لنا السنة مقوار أو تمرتي بتعمقن قبز لنا. I understand not everyone needs to go to college. There are so many talented زخانو سوات بخالق جيرهم هيوتهم successful زجورو. جن at least we need to have the basics. زبهالفلت أتكلم الناس اللي زلوا أو تمرتي زلوا قلعت كوز قبهم من العلي pressure كن جورو لهم زلنا أي مثلاً. أو college it's okay. مخناتو at least adult يوم نوعلاتهم resist جوري خل يوم زمت إمتى. توم أكالي تحز ولا درجات مرتزلوا قلعت كن مجمرتا نوعلاتهم تبقوا زخانة وتزيد كم توينا كنا بلوم زلنا. I want to give an example of how members of our community that are in college are using the privilege that is available to them to put Tigray on the map. 2 weeks ago I was in Buffalo to attend a panel discussion that was organized by Tigrayan brothers that go to that school. His name is Alula. And he organized his entire community. He talked to the college, he talked to his professors, he made sure they understood what was happening back home, and he used his privilege to create a platform for us to advocate. These are the kind of things we need to do, because it doesn't only give us a platform to talk about what's happening, but it also gives us an opportunity to connect with professionals, with academicians, that can be friends of Tigray in the long run, not only today. So in our approach, whether we're in high school or in university, we have to be forward-looking. We shouldn't be tactical, we should rather be strategic in our approach. So if you're tactical, what you do is you put everything on hold and you focus on Tigray. So you're not going to attend your classes, you're not going to study as much as you should. That is you being tactical. For the time being, you might feel like you're doing something productive, but you really are not, because you're putting your future at risk. And you putting your future at risk is also putting Tigray's future at risk. So, نوعلتنا كحالينا بزح جزينة تمرتي قالت زهامنا يو نتقرأ حالينا ون. We have to put more time to our school and education. So I want to encourage people that are in high school and college to make their education a priority, because look at us here. All of us, we have gained some kind of diploma or some kind of degree. That's why we're being able to do the work we do. So take it from us that you have to put yourself first and develop professionally. And after that, there will be a very long time for you to do a lot of good for Tigray. Thank you.
Mazza said everything I was going to say in 2 languages while wearing heels, so I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, thank you, Mazza. I think one of the good things about TPN, and I'm always talking about TPN because I love TPN a lot, is that what a lot of people tell me, people who are maybe 40 and older, is like, I wish I had this when I was younger. So I think TPN and the forum in general creates a good space for everyone to network and get those opportunities starting from a young age. Especially in Atlanta, we start with 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and we just make sure that they have the opportunity to explore what kind of subjects they want to get into, any fields, any type of schools and different trades. So I think just providing the opportunity from a young age through these organizations like TPN is a really important thing. So next, I'm going to ask each one of you a sort of personalized question. Gurmai, will start with you. Considering that you are currently in public office, how does constituent engagement affect the decisions that you make?
Constituent engagement is everything. And so how many of you are familiar with the saying, where there's a will, there's a way? All of you, right? It's almost a cliche, but it is the truest statement that you can have in politics. If there is a political will for something, there is a way for it to happen. The only thing standing in the way of things happening is the political will. If everybody in this country stood up and said, we want this thing to happen, I bet you it would happen by tomorrow, no matter how impossible you think it is. They say that Medicare for all, health insurance for everybody is too expensive and we can't do it. If everybody stood up and said we wanted it, it would happen tomorrow. And that's the case for everything. And so when we're talking about constituent engagement, that is my constituents in my district and around the world making their voice heard about a particular cause. That is the thing that drives change. Now, there's some strategy to that, right? A few things that I would advise. Number one, when you talk to your elected officials, have a specific ask. What specifically are you asking for? I've been in a lot of rooms where people share the problem statement. They share what's going on, they share heartbreaking stories, but they don't have a specific ask for the elected officials. You have to come with a specific ask. What are you asking them to do? Number two, make sure you're talking to the right level of government for the thing that you're asking for. If you're asking about international policy, you probably want to make sure that ultimately your strategy is leading toward the federal government, federal representatives. So have the specific ask, know the specific level of government and what jurisdiction they have over. And finally, when you have the thing that you want and you know what level of government that you need to direct it to, have a strategy around that. How do you get these particular elected officials to make the decision that you're asking them to make? Because 9 times out of 10, they're not just gonna do the right thing. They're gonna do the thing that, people who they listen to are doing. They're gonna do the thing that, is very popular in their district. They're gonna do the thing that's gonna get them elected. They're gonna do the thing that's gonna make them money. They're gonna do the thing that the influencers around them are telling them to do. So you can form a strategy based on the thing you want, based on the level of government that you're talking about, and you form that strategy, and you can make sure that the thing that you want happens.
Thank you, Gurmai. Fana, so what have your biggest takeaways been from your time in the Georgia State Legislature and navigating the press conference and the backlash that you faced?
Yeah, so I think I would start by highlighting something that Ma'aza mentioned earlier. It's really important that you make use of the spaces that you're in. And my policy courses definitely played a role in the press conference happening. So in many of my policy courses, I've been extremely vocal about what's been happening in Tigray. And the beauty of these courses are that a lot of the students there also are passionate about issues affecting marginalized groups. And there was this one particular day early this year, I think it was the first week of January, returning back, and I was updating my classmates about how dire the situation in Tigray had gotten. And one of my classmates felt extremely compelled to do something. So on his own time, he reached out to the elected official that he worked for and saw if she would be willing to draft a resolution on the state level simply to bring awareness. And he came back to me and said she would love to do it. I never ended up following up with that elected official because I began working for State Senator Kim Jackson and presented the idea to her instead. But I think I wanted to highlight the importance of making use of the space that you're in. That class I was in the middle of downtown Atlanta, 7 o'clock at night with 20 people. I could have easily said, I don't feel like talking about Tigray here. But because I did, it led me to know about an opportunity to advocate. And in my time in the state legislature, one thing that I took away was the power of forming genuine relationships, investing in people and caring to know them. I know that we are in a very difficult predicament right now because when we're advocating for our families, time is of the essence. We don't have time to become great friends with every single person we meet. We're constantly seeing reports about our families being starved. It is a very urgent matter, and it makes us feel like we need to go 1,000 miles an hour. But I think there is beauty and power in getting to know people and forming genuine connections. In my time in the legislature, I got to meet other interns, other colleagues, other staffers, and I took an interest in their stories. What led you into politics? And what I realized is what I shared earlier. A lot of us end up in these spaces because we have of the pain and trauma and struggles in our own lives. And we start to see our own suffering and the suffering of each other. And so one of my colleagues was an older white woman. And she said, I have no idea where Tigray is, but I love you so much and I'm here to support you. And so she went out of her way to try to connect me with people. And it became this whole network of colleagues and friends really stepping in and really wanting to help bring attention to such a dire crisis, especially considering that on the state level, within the state legislature, not a single elected official knew what was happening in Tigray. not even an elected official who introduced legislation about genocide awareness a month earlier before the press conference. And so that's that second takeaway. Form genuine relationships, take an interest in the stories of those around you. That's where humanity is fostered. That's where compassion is fostered. And my last takeaway is going to be highlighting the backlash. As you know, if you don't know, the district that State Senator Kim Jackson presides over is heavily populated with Ethiopians, Eritreans, East Africans. And that includes Ethiopians from parts of Ethiopia that are not Tigray. And so when they saw the press conference, there was a lot of backlash, a lot of attacking, a lot of all of that stuff. And so as an elected official, State Senator Kim Jackson has an obligation to listen to her constituents. She has an obligation to simply hear them. And something that I realized was that I was starting to see how the lack of civic education in our community was backfiring on us. Because a lot of our people didn't understand how politics works, or simply that resolution it's not congressional, right? It's not on a federal level, it's simply to spread awareness. A lot of our people began to panic. And they thought that Senator Kim Jackson was a US senator, that she had power and leverage over S3199, and that she was no longer standing with Tigray, when in reality, she was just doing her job. She was listening to her constituents saying, I'm sorry that it affected you in this way. She never once took back anything she said for Tigray, but our people reacted out of emotion and got very scared. And something I want to encourage us to do is to be mindful of the way that we portray ourselves and the relationships that we build with our elected officials. Yes, today, right now, in some ways we have to be tactful, but we also need to be strategic and think long-term for Tigray. Tigray is gonna need healthy relationships with our US officials long down the road. And we won't get there if we attack every time we hear something that hurts our feelings. And of course, in this context, it is deeply understood that we are in a very raw, sensitive place. It's so difficult, yes, to see an elected official stand with you so clearly and then see them at the community center of people who represent a country that is inflicting the harm on you. But I want to encourage our people to really hold each other accountable. Before you post something on social media, check with yourself to make sure that what you're posting is accurate and true, and think to yourself, is this gonna better serve our people in Tigray, or is it gonna harm them? Or is it just gonna do nothing, really, at the end of the day? So those are my takeaways.
Thank you, Fana. And Maaza, your involvement, as we highlighted earlier, in advocacy began prior to the genocidal war taking place in Tigray, and it was rooted in addressing gender inequality in Tigray. How have you navigated current advocacy, knowing that your previous work has been used to justify the usage of weaponized SGBV in Tigray?
It has been quite a challenging journey because I have seen people in organizations I looked up to for a very long time using my previous advocacy to justify the weaponized rape that young women and girls in Tigray have had to endure. Personally, it hurts a lot to see, people that you consider to be your role models turning into a nightmare. But I wasn't surprised because ክቐትሉ እንድሕር ክደፍሩ ክቐትሉ እንድሕር ምንም ዘይመሰሎም እቲ ዝገብርዎ ዘለዉ ስራሕ ንምሽፋን ዝድለይቶም ዓይነት ምኽንያታት ተጠቐሙ ብዙሕ ኣየደንግፅን. But I also don't want to dwell into, talking about how they used my work, but I want to clarify two distinctions that people usually tend to miss while talking about gender-based violence and weaponized gender-based violence. These are two distinctly different things. Women get violated everywhere, be it here in the US, be it in the Western Hemisphere or in Africa. In the developed and both in the underdeveloped countries, women and girls get violated every day. Gender-based violence manifests itself in so many different ways. It starts from ከመጌርካ ንሓንቲ ጓል ኣድረስ ከም ትገብራ ብዘረባ all the way physically abuse ምግባር. So the fact that myself and other feminists in Tigray, both men and women, came together and co-founded Yuhono is a reflection of the level of understanding that we had as a community. that as a community, we knew Tigrayan women deserve better. We knew there is more to what we were saying, which is why we all came together, not only to fight against gender-based violence that we were seeing in our day-to-day life, but also to foster a healthy relationship, to bring gender parity in Tigray so that we can collectively grow together. What we're seeing today is gender-based violence that is being used as a war tactic. So this is completely different. Now, you see women and girls in Tigray being violated, not only because they're women, but because of their ethnic identity. So this is completely different, because this is systemic, this has a political goal or objective. So whenever you guys are confronted with, it could be one of my previous tweets, or it could be one of my previous interviews talking about gender-based violence in Tigray, don't shy away from defending it, because weaponized gender-based violence ማለት ንሓደ ህዝቢ ንኽተጥፍኦ ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ስለ ዝኾነ ጥራሕ ዘይኮነስ ከም ሰብ ክጠፍኣ ስለ ዘለዎም ከም ተጋሩ ከም መሳርሒ እዮም ዝጥቀሙ ዘለዉ in today's Tigray gender-based violence is being used not only to terrorize the woman body but also to terrorize the whole Tigrayan community and to extinct نحن existence ማለት እዩ but also ከም ተዓንቶናልኩ ፀናሕኩ the fact that we had ይኾኑ the fact that people like me were bold enough and courageous enough to talk about it reflects very highly on our community. ኣብ ገዛይ ኣነ ክዓቢ ከለኹ ኣደይ ጓልተ ኣንስተይቲ ክትፅረፍ የብላን ተተፀሪፍኪ መሰልኪ ክትሐሊ ክትቃለስ ኣለኪ ናበለት ተዘይተምህረኒ ነይራ ኣሕዋተይ ከምኡ ናበሉ ተዘይዕዊኑ ነይሮም I wouldn't have had the courage to speak at all. So, and this is not just me, we had so many members within the Yuhona movement. So as I said earlier, the fact that we had a movement to fight against gender-based, violence in Tigray speaks very highly of the community. We can talk about other parts of Ne'alam. For example, here in the US, you have the Me Too movement, you have the Time's Up, you have so many feminist movements that aspire to bring gender parity and to better life for women. It's not because the United States is the worst country for women to be globally. We know so many other countries where they have very bad track record of women's rights, but you hardly see anyone speaking against the violence women go to in that area. And that's primarily because there are social, cultural, and economic as well as political factors that are hindering people from speaking up. So the same thing applies in Ethiopia too. ኣብ ትግራይ ከምኡ ወፂና ንሕና ምዝራብና ቅድሚ ሕዚ ማሕበረሰብና ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ካብዝን ልዕሊ ይግብአን እዩ ኢሉ ይኣምን ስለ ዝነበረ ንሕና ወፂና ኣብ መዓልታዊ ህይወትና ዘጋጥሙ ዝነበሩ ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ዘጋጥምዎን መሰለን መሰረት ዝገበረ ወፃዓታት ክቕረፍ ኣለዎ ኢሉ ይኣምን ማሕበረሰብ ስለ ዘለና ኢና ንሕና ወፂና ክንዛረብ ክኢልና ኣብ ዓፋር ክትሪኡ ትኽእሉ ኢኹም ንኣብነት ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ኩለን ይኽንሸባ እየን ይግረዛ እየን ገና ቆልዑት እናሃለያ ግን ከምዚ ዓይነት ድሑር ዝኾነ ባህል ንኽጠፍእ ዝንቀሳቐስ ዝኾነ ውዳዊ ኾነ ኢንዲቪዥዋላት የለዋን ኣብኡ ምክንያቱ ገና እቲ ማሕበረሰብ ኣብቲ ናይ ደቂ ኣንስትዮ መሰል ዘለዎ መለኻኽታ ዝዓበየ ስለ ዘይኮነ እዩ ኣብ ዓረብ ዓድታት you can hardly find women's rights organizations or advocacy groups that work on improving life for women in the Arab countries. It's not necessarily because women have it easier there. It's because there is no conducive environment for that type of advocacy. But in Tigray, we had that. And that's too much credit to our community. So, دحر حزي ناتي تويت كونا ناتي زاروا نامتو تحزي زقبر زلو gender-based violence. justify كجورهم كورخلو كم مزرعنا يكونن حتى كم إننا خنزارو مخالنا دك أنستي خندي زأكل empowered زخنا خم زخنا مرأي خم زخنا تقيسكم challenge كتجوروا ميجبا مخنات خلت يوم these are completely two different things as I said earlier تحزنوا رؤية زلنا دك أنستي زود عاز قتلا زد فرازلوا دك أنستي سلا زخنا راح يكونن تجارو سلا زخنا نايت أورنت مسار حجرهم يمسك كامل زلوا gender-based violence سقيلو بقليلو جن توتا مسرز جوار متقعتي أما العالم يزقبر تجري كأني عالم أكل سلزخانات أو تجري وندك أنستيو بتوتا أنا مسرت كتقعي خلاصين جن relatively تمتقع نستو جيجا زخانة زأمن محورسة وجن نيرنا نعو new when we started يخونا first in 2019 I believe everyone joined hands. I remember the advocacy that we laid online. Everyone joined ካብ ምሁር እስካዕ ቀሺ ካብ ሓጂ እስካዕ ሓረስታይ ብሙሉ እዩ ተሳቲፉ even virtually wala everyone was so excited to talk about gender equality, to talk about issues that knock each and everyone's doors. So we have to understand, we have to take great amount of pride knowing that we have a society and a community that recognizes there is so much more that can be done to bring about gender parity, which is why they encouraged us to do the work we did private to the conflict. But as I said earlier, it was so shocking even to hear and to see my previous advocacy being used by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission to justify the weaponized rape. After report them out when they did the joint investigation by the UN Human Rights Commission as well as the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, they used تنحنا protests governayo, تنحنا governayo na online activism. They tried to hide and to justify the weaponized rape and assaults that they have been committing. But fortunately, for experts that work within the issues that are pertaining to gender, they do understand the difference between a weaponized gender-based violence and a normal gender-based violence. So, I want you to take great amount of pride knowing that you came from a community and a society that encouraged people like me to speak about gender-based violence prior to the conflict.
Thank you so much, Ma'aza. I think it's really important to make that distinction. And for the sake of time, we'll have one more question. It's a really loaded question, but we'll try to keep it brief for each one of you guys. What is your vision for the future of the Tigrayan diaspora in the U.S. with regards to U.S. and Tigrayan politics?
My vision for our family back home is to be happy, healthy, safe, thriving. My vision for our community here in the U.S. is to be happy, healthy, safe, and thriving. And I do think our political engagement is a bridge to get there because right now we're not there. We're being harmed in a lot of ways. And I actually started an initiative in Washington State to train people who want to run for office. We meet once a month, we gather, and I share with them, how did I run for office? What documents did I file? How did I hire a political consultant? Which doors did we knock on? All the nitty-gritty details about how to run for office. So if there's anybody in here who is interested in running for office and shaping policy so that our communities can be happy, healthy, safe, and thriving, always feel free to talk to me.
I'm going to build on that a bit more. When I think about the future, let's say the next 20 plus years, I envision a diaspora here of Tagaru that are established in the American political space. I cannot wait to see more Gurmais in office, more Ma'azas in office, hopefully in Tigray, an independent Tigray.
More Fanas too, definitely.
And thank you. And not only that, I can't wait to see our communities more organized, politically speaking. What we're seeing now is just the beginning. And I think this is extremely beautiful because Wa'ala is an opportunity for us to come together and build the little Tigray here. Because truthfully, like we've said earlier, there's not much we're going to be able to offer our people back home if we're not established and organized here. And whenever I think about this vision, I think about my sister Zuhair. She was someone who understood the beauty and power of community organizing. She is someone who understood the beauty of working on a grassroots level and investing on people in an individual level from the ground up. We're not going to get to the top until the seed is planted. And Zuhair understood that. And so I just want to say that looking forward, I hope that we can begin to address these issues politically speaking. Our communities here in the diaspora, they are plagued with issues. We have issues pertaining to mental health, addiction, lack of access to education or familial support. And when we're better able to address these issues, I think we will be much more equipped to support, God willing, a free and independent Tigray in the years to come. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
My vision is literally similar to what Brother Gurmai and Fana said. Just to add a bit more, my vision is to see a strong Tigrayan community across the world, so that we will be taken as a force to be reckoned with by politicians and policymakers, that we will be taken as an interest group that they have to listen to if they're to make it in their political career. And to make that happen, it's very important that we all come together through different community organizations, including WALA, that encourages younger people to take position. That this is a forum that understands the power that lays within the younger generation. So I hope everybody across the US and also across the world would get an opportunity to learn more about WALA and to implement the strategies that you guys have been using so far to give us incredibly brilliant leaders such as everyone you see here, including Mabrat, Aksum, Aziza, and so many others. To do this, we have to first, as a community, we need to recognize the fact that while we walk on the shoulders of our forefathers, while we walk on the shoulders of the older generation, we have to give power, we have to give space for the younger generation to lead us through the way. And once we do that, I am hopeful and confident that we will see a better Tigray, that we will see the light at the end of the tunnel and see, like what Gurmai said, Salam Jallowa, Rahwa Jallowa, Sun Khamat Sigan, we all need to work together. Hadinat Kalena Lowo. We have unity of purpose. Our purpose is, like Gurmai said, Salam Jallowa, Rahwa Jallowa, Adin Khalena. Common in Agwar, we all have to come together and work together, understanding in Halena. So, Sun Magwar, I hope we'll continue to do the job that we have been doing, and also we'll be open to criticisms and to feedback so that we continue to develop as members of community, as leaders, and as individuals. Also important to foster leadership, inclusive leadership. We have religious diversity, we have age diversity, diversity. Everything we do here needs to reflect what Tigray looks like on the ground, and we have to be intentional with the places we hold and how we hold them. So that's my vision for Tigray and the diaspora here.
All right, thank you so much, Maaza. Thank you. One final round of applause for our panelists. And also, thank you all so much for being present and being patient with us. And we have a great night ahead.
Thank you, Giselle. Wow, 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 what a day. Let's give another round of applause to our last panel discussion. I'm just going to share a few closing remarks as they are taking pictures. So just a couple more minutes of your time. Thank you all for your attendance today. I know it was a very long day, but everything we talked about was in line with our theme. Tagado resilience, moving from awareness to action, and doing what we need to do to have those important conversations about building Little Tigray. We started with the mental health awareness panel. We had our convo with Maui Askadom. We talked about the net worth of Tigrayan communities, women leading change, community building, and then what's next after we continue to fight for the Tigray genocide. And I have to say, all of these panel discussions, we weren't able to have these today if it wasn't for our sister Zuhair. Zuhair planned these panel discussions for us. So thank you to our sister Zuhair.